Hey everyone, Pugs here with two new reviews for y'all. Today I'm covering Krusty Krushers and The Card. Damn, why is this kind of a repeat of the last review? I mean, a forgotten episode plus an infamous one? Though I think we can all agree that Krusty Krushers is much less forgotten about than Porous Pockets, and The Card is much less infamous than Choir Boys. But still, what a funny coincidence! As always, a thank you goes out to everyone watching today. I love y'all's support a whole bunch. And now, why don't I just get right into this next set of episodes? Krusty Krushers. What can I say about you in this little introduction of mine? This is one of those episodes that's remembered entirely because of a single joke, I feel. I have never seen anyone talk about this episode unless they're talking about the part of the episode where SpongeBob and Patrick beat the wrestlers, and even then I don't see very many mentions of that. And as such, I have no idea what the general opinions are about this episode. That's probably a good thing though, right? Means all thoughts here are my own. Well, they always are, but y'all know what I mean. I also find this episode forgettable in the personal sense, where I don't remember very much of the episode in general until I rewatch it and review parts of it using the SpongeBob wiki, and since I have rewatched this episode somewhat recently, it's easy to say why exactly this episode is forgettable, but I'll get there when I get there. One thing that isn't too forgettable about this episode is the setup, which I find to be interesting, as this episode is about wrestling. I imagine it's probably supposed to be a parody of professional wrestling like the WWE. Wrestling bores me so greatly, so I want to know. I don't think I've ever watched WWE in my life, and I have no plans to. Anyway, unfortunately, despite the interesting setup, the actual plot in this episode is not that great. Listen, the plot was good at first. I liked how after hearing about the wrestling championship, Mr. Krabs immediately went up in there to try and win the cash prize, but then he humorously realized that he'd get his ass handed to him if he tried, which is why he decides that SpongeBob and Patrick will be the ones to act as his champions. This latter part of the plot is woefully predictable. And I mean, predictable isn't bad necessarily, but considering that this episode would have probably been more entertaining if it was SpongeBob and Squidward in the ring, the predictability of using SpongeBob and Patrick here does not work in this episode's favor. It would have been even better if they brought in Sandy for this episode, but unfortunately we are in the part of the show's run where they've forgotten that Sandy is not only a main character, but one of the big five, so that did not happen. Another issue that this episode has is that it takes place entirely in one location, being basically a bottle episode. Can animated shows have bottle episodes? I mean, if they limit the number of backgrounds and characters, I guess technically yes? Whatever. It's a bottle episode in spirit. If you don't know what that is, I put a link in the description. Anyway, an episode taking place in a single location is not inherently an issue, but it becomes a problem for Krusty Krushers as this episode does not do nearly enough to prevent things from becoming stale after 11 minutes in this one locale. Like I said, the beginning is fine. The bit with Mr. Krabs is not as funny as it was likely meant to be, but it was still amusing, and Perch Perkins appearing was a nice bonus. I also liked the cameos here from various muscled guys in previous episodes, and I liked that we got a My Leg gag in there, since it's been a while, so all of this is at least decent. That changes once SpongeBob and Patrick enter the scene. From here, the episode is just kind of boring for a while. The part where SpongeBob and Patrick are blindfolded lasts too long in my opinion, the joke being played out pretty quickly, and when the two do realize what's going on, or at least kind of since Mr. Krabs still lies, that scene takes too long too. And I'm not even talking about runtime when I say the scenes are taking too long, I just mean that during them, nothing funny is happening, so it feels like a drag. That was probably obvious, but I like to be clear. One good thing in this part is that we get the setup to a brick joke with the iron bun bit. And let me go on a side note tangent type thing real quick, cause I find this cutaway gag to be a little weird because why does it use a bubble transition? Those transitions always imply the passage of time, but this is a cutaway flashback, so that was an odd thing that happened in this scene that just jumped out at me, so I felt like I had to share it. Anyway, tangent over. Let me get back to talking about the scene. So we continue to have nothing funny happen as SpongeBob and Patrick beg for wrestling names, and then they start saying yeah and woo for entirely too long. Now, I get why the second thing happened, as the awkwardly long length here is supposed to be the point, just like with many jokes this season. However, as I say time and time again, just because it's supposed to be awkward doesn't automatically make that awkwardness funny. Awkward humor can be done well, but this episode is not an example of that. Once the actual fight begins between SpongeBob and Patrick and the wrestlers, things do improve, at least a little bit. I like how unfazed SpongeBob and Patrick are throughout this scene. Like, it reminded me of The Inmates of Summer, an episode I really liked. The bit with SpongeBob translating the guy's scream was also good, and I also thought that the mouthwash bit had some fun visuals going along with it. But even with all this scene generally felt empty, like there's almost no jokes at all. Even Mr. Krabs, who's usually a highlight in slow, dull episodes like this, is not at his A game. It's frankly a very sad affair. We then get the rematch, and this is for sure an improvement. I love SpongeBob and Patrick's bluster. Like, it's fun to watch, especially because of how unintimidating they are. And yes, I know that I'm essentially explaining the joke, but that's just what I do. This section also had some neat visuals, like even more than the previous section, so that was a bonus. But once again, there's little to laugh at here. Mr. Krabs' utter exhaustion at SpongeBob and Patrick's sheer ineptitude is at least entertaining, and I really liked the visual of him being angry. Moving on to the last rematch, which is probably the most memorable part of this episode, this is probably where the episode reaches its peak. The sleeper hold pun was fun, I liked that, and then we get what is easily the most brilliant part of Krusty Krushers, which is the brick joke with Patrick's butt workout. See, if this episode was filled with sharp humor like this, it would have been excellent. Hell, if it had more fluid animation, we could have gotten some real good slapstick out of this one. Alas, it wasn't meant to be. Anywho, I do really like this joke. It was well crafted and a good way to end this fight. Seeing SpongeBob and Patrick win is cute and always a positive, but I wouldn't quite say it was quote-unquote satisfying since they weren't really struggling as they weren't invested in this fight whatsoever, and there's nothing wrong with that. It wasn't the point of the episode, but that extra element of satisfaction could have been useful in making this episode more entertaining, as this episode really needed all the help it could get in that regard. The very end of the episode is perhaps the best part along with the butt workout joke. SpongeBob and Patrick decide to go to wrestle camp instead of claiming the cash prize, meaning all of this was for nothing. I love how the money is taken right out from under Mr. Krabs. Now that's satisfying! And I love the way Mr. Krabs just falls apart. Reminds me of the ending stingers of Procrastination or Squid's Day Off. In general, Krusty Krushers is just kinda a dull episode that I think could have been something really great with some changes. Honestly, those changes probably would have needed to be major. The wrestling focus of the episode is just fine, but everything else beyond that has at least one issue, so this whole episode could have been redone, in my humble opinion. There are some great moments in here, particularly during the last minute and a half, but other than that, this episode is a bore. So I'd say that this episode works best as a low okay tier episode, where it comes in with a score of 6.4 out of 10. Ah, the card. This is of course our infamous episode in today's infamous and forgettable double feature. Here's the thing about this episode. I can't think of it without thinking of that review by you-know-who. You know the one, right? Where they talk about how The Card is the worst episode for Patrick as a character. Yes, that one. I bring this up because I think that review actually makes this episode better for me because it's just so hilarious because of how melodramatic it is. Kind of like how the security system meme makes that scene better for me in Good Neighbors. And then before I get started, just one more thing. Y'all remember all the times that I've said that I hate feeling frustrated when watching an episode, correct? Yes? Good. I think you might want to hold tight to that memory, and now I can get started. The first scene of The Card taking place at the bank is a great example of my first issue with this episode. It's boring. This is not the biggest problem of this episode, but it certainly ain't helping things along. The scene here just drags on for way too long, and I understand what the writers were going for here. Like, SpongeBob is supposed to seem weird to the bank guy, and, you know, I like that well enough, but this awkward humor has got to stop, because it is not working. And with goofy conversation continued playing in the background, the purposefully cultivated awkward vibes of the scene are enhanced, which doesn't help. If you aren't familiar with that track, I linked it in the description, but I guarantee that if you've seen middle-aged SpongeBob, you know exactly what track I'm talking about, even if you don't know its name. Part of me is rather impressed by how these writers continually are able to produce these awkward vibes again and again. Like, I've said this for at least 5 or 6 episodes now in this season alone. So yes, they've got awkwardness down to a T. The problem is that awkwardness is not something I'm interested in watching, and I've said this time and time again. At least the little joke with the robber was somewhat good. And then moving on to the scene at the comic book store, this is unfortunately also very boring. Once the cards get introduced, the trajectory of this plot also becomes clear, and I can't say that I'm a fan. Like, actually, let me talk about the cards for a second. This is kind of related, but not really. So, one thing that I think is funny, and not in an enjoyment way, but like a, ooh, that's odd kind of way, about the card, is that this episode really should not have been about cards. Like, to me, this episode is more about collectibles, with the whole focus on super rare cards, and the fact that the characters never actually use the cards to play games here. It feels like the choice to use cards as the focal point was a misstep. And yes, I'm nitpicking the high heaven here. I can do what I want. I'm not getting, I don't know, Magic the Gathering or Yu-Gi-Oh vibes here. This is more Funko Pop, or even better, Silly Bands. Though people collect Pokemon cards, right? I guess it's like that. As you can see, I neither collect collectibles nor play card games like this. I'm more of a standard deck of cards kind of person. Alright, tangent over. Let me get back to the episode. So, once Patrick rather predictably gets a hold of the rare card, I realize how much better this episode could have been had it leaned into the card or collectible angle more. Because Patrick lacking completely, like, any care towards this rare card could have been legitimately funny, especially if the episode had emphasized how much the card doesn't matter because things like this are fake and arbitrary traps for consumerism. What the episode does instead doesn't even make a ton of sense for what we know of Patrick, considering that he likes Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy as much as SpongeBob, and therefore it would be reasonable to assume that he'd care about this collectible. On the other hand, Patrick doesn't live that kind of consumerist lifestyle, so again, if the episode had leaned into this, it could have been pretty interesting. But I digress. I did like the bit where we see how Patrick completely just zones out when SpongeBob speaks. I thought it was amusing, and it helps to explain some things. Moving right along, after Patrick receives the card, the episode largely consists of SpongeBob painstakingly keeping the card safe in the midst of all of the incidents Patrick finds himself falling into. These little bits and gags range in entertainment value, going from being interesting to utterly dull and boring, and at times even frustrating. Never does it quite reach the level of funny, though. Well, except for one moment, which, coincidentally but not really, happens to be the moment that this episode is known for. Y'all know what I'm talking about. Does SpongeBob, you can't always expect my usual brand of stupidity. I like to mix it up, keep you on your toes. Ring a bell, perhaps? Yes, back in the day, there was a time that I'd been influenced to hate this line and all that it apparently represented. That is definitely not how I think anymore. See, people, or, one person, got so mad at this line because they examined it from a Watsonian perspective, where they took it as an in-universe explanation for Patrick's behavior. And that's a valid perspective, even if I think that it's a very uncharitable reading of Patrick here. I like looking at it from a Watsonian perspective too. But it's even better looking at it from a Doyleist, out-of-universe perspective. With that kind of analysis, it's clear that this line is a brilliant lampshading of writing inconsistency played in a very comedic way. And then back to thinking of this line from an in-universe explanation, I just really love when Patrick has these moments of lucidity. They're often either really funny or very annoying, since it's usually accompanied by smug Patrick. Patprick? Oh, that's a throwback. I also love how after Patrick has this moment of clarity, he falls right into a construction site. That was really funny. Unfortunately, this is the last funny bit for basically the rest of the episode, because after that we're just forced into watching more boring and annoying shit. And I like how Patrick offers the card to SpongeBob, but this kind gesture makes the last few minutes of this episode painful and downright frustrating to sit through. Like, why is Patrick treating something that he means to give to his best friend like this? And after the card completely disintegrates, we learn that Patrick actually had all 5 copies of the super rare card. So after all the trials and tribulations, SpongeBob gets his well-deserved win. And we also get a gorgeous background out of this part, so I get a win too. And the very ending joke of this episode is pretty funny, so that's a good note to end on. The card is yet another episode that I've changed my opinion on, at least somewhat considerably. Like, I used to dislike it a lot more. But since I had to sit down and rewatch it to write the written review of it, and because I'm not just blindly listening to an overly angered cartoon reviewer, I have much more comprehensive opinions about this episode. Now, of course, this is not me saying that this episode is good, because it's not, but it's not horrible, which is what I used to think. No, the card is just boring with some always wonderful sides of frustration, along with some legitimately wonderful bits of humor. All in all, it fits best in my mediocre tier, where it comes in with a score of 5.3 out of 10. As always, I'll be ending this video with some closing thoughts of mine. I wonder if there will be any other infamous plus forgettable episode duos. It's just so funny to me that this happened twice in a row. I've got lots of closing thoughts about the infamous episode here, but let me take a second with Krusty Krushers. This episode really flies under the radar, don't it? I do wonder if some of the humor of this episode is lost for me because the WWE does not interest me at all. Are they appealing to that kind of dramatic flair? I don't know. Maybe someone in the comments can enlighten me. Okay, now the card. So I mentioned that people seem to get most mad at the Patrick line when they take it as an explanation for his behavior across the entire show. I suppose I can understand that perspective given that I shared it, or thought I shared it once upon a time, but I also think that's an overreaction, and as I said, it's also an uncharitable reading of Patrick. Really, all this episode does is confirm that Patrick is a troll, just like episodes like Fool in April or SpongeBob Meets the Strangler confirm that SpongeBob is a troll, and I find this shit to be funny. Patrick is just in it for the love of the game, and I think that's hilarious. Also, I think it's interesting that certain people get mad at this line because it shows that Patrick knows he's a shit friend in some of these episodes, and I disagree with that. Every time Patrick is a shit friend, it's not because he's a fool, it's because he's a smug asshole, a position that comes with him being pretty knowledgeable and reasonable, so this line doesn't even have anything to do with that. I also just find it really ironic that a line meant to poke fun at the inconsistencies in the show is being used to explain Patrick's behavior across the show. Like, I fear that this line has been misinterpreted because of bad faith readings, but I mean, that's par for the course when it comes to season 1 through 3 Dick Riders, isn't it? Nobody wants to engage in good faith anymore. Man, I can rant for days about that and how online fandom spaces are just full of bad faith actors, but I'll just keep it brief and say there are many reasons why I block liberally, and that is one of them. Now part of me wants to make a video on Arcane, but I won't do that. That would require me to rewatch season 2, and I'm not touching that shit with a 10-foot pole ever again. Does anyone watching this video even watch Arcane? I probably just sound like a ranting fool if you don't. I guess that's a sign I should end the video now, right? So I'll go ahead and do that, and I'll see you all in the next review.